you guys are helping me with this. We have a tradition here at St. Andrews where on Mother's Day, done it for a lot of years, we give out a few roses to some mothers. And so let's just start with one that's a favorite around here, and I've never really understood it, but it's great. And so we're going to do this. Who has come the farthest for this service? Now, you guys online, you don't count. Sorry, you got to be here to actually get it. So let's have all of the women who live at least roughly 5 miles or further that came here today. Stand up. All the mothers who have come at least 5 miles to come to church today, stand up, please. And it just be approximate. Some of you are going, I don't get a GPS. So okay. The rest of you are within 5 miles. That's fantastic. Okay. Let's say 10 miles. Who came at least 10 miles to be here today? All right. This is good. Now, those of you in the back, I can't see, the lights aren't on, so you got to yell really loud if I don't see you and I forget you. But, okay, 15 miles. 15, okay, we lost a couple there. We got 3 back there, right? And we got 1 right there, 2 right here. Okay, 1 in the back. All right, 20 miles. Okay, with 2 down, all right. 25 miles. Okay, 136, no, I'm just kidding. Let's say 40 miles. 40 miles, no. Let's say we got 1, 2, 3, 4 left. Is that correct, everybody? All right, so 4 of you, how many miles? Which would be 90. Boy, okay, thank you. Gina's just sat down. Way to go. You get a rose anyway because you guys sang, both of you. Yes. 45 miles, and how far? Oh, you were at the last one. You came for the sermon again. What's the matter with you? Okay. So let's go with San Diego. Let's give them a big hand for coming a long distance. Wait a minute. You stay standing. Right up there, and 1 right here, since you're second. Okay, see right there? She's standing there. Okay, you can run in church. Isn't that awesome? You can jump over the pews. You can do whatever you want. That's so cool. Now let's go with a mom that's been the mom the longest. This means that you have been a mom for several years. So let's start with all the women that have been a mom for at least 20 years. You stand up. You've been a mom for at least 20 years. Wow, great. Thank you. Congratulations. Some of you took a little longer to stand up, and that means you're going to probably be standing up a little bit longer as well. So that would be great. If you've been a mom at least 30 years, stay standing. At least 30 years. Oh, great. At least 40 years, stay standing. At least 40. Pat, yeah, there you go. At least 40. We got several here. Thank you for being here. At least 50 years you've been a mom. Stay standing. Fantastic. At least 60 years. Oh, my goodness. All right, let's see. Anybody in the back? I'm going this way. Okay, right there. Thank you. So all right, let's go 65 years. Been a mom 65 years. Anybody left? Yay. Right there. Okay, both you two. How long? How many? 70 years? Fantastic. And how long have you been a mom? Helper. 62. That's okay. Second place is 62. Thank you. That's great. And now we have the great privilege of talking about who has been the mom the shortest amount of time. And the actual winner is not here, so she doesn't win, although we may give you an exception, take a rose to her, because last Monday at 12:30 something, Abigail Munchal gave birth to Teddy. There's Brandon right there. Stand up, Brandon. Yay! 6 days old. That's so fantastic. So all of you who have been a mother for, and this is your oldest child, all right, this is the least amount of time, your oldest child, you've been a mother for 5 years or less. Stand up. Your oldest child is 5 or under, okay? A lot of you are trying to do the figure it out. Okay, okay. Think of your oldest kid, how old they are, and just do the math. Perfect. And there's just a few of you standing. So how long? 3 years. Okay. And how long? 5 years. Okay. Great. And 4 years? 3 years. We had a 7-week-old. Oh, we got one more? Oh, way back. How long? 9 months. Prove it. Okay, there he is. He or she. All right, way back in the back. Let's give all our mothers and grandmothers. Oh, wait, we got one. Well, we got another flower. See, I love how you guys are pointing. It couldn't be darker back there. All right, how long? 10 months. Yay! Okay, we got any? Is that it? Anybody else hiding? Okay, that's fantastic. One more time for all of our mothers. I'm really grateful that we do this to honor mothers. I think it's fantastic in so many ways. And yet, I have to acknowledge something. That in the course of my life, I've been made aware. I wish that I should have just known this, but I've been made aware more and more that a time like Mother's Day can be extremely difficult for some women and some men, actually. And it could be even deeply painful. I know several women that have written me or talked to me in the last couple of weeks and said, I'm not planning on going to church, whether it's here or other churches, because so often as they honor mothers, something about their own life circumstances, and it can be a wide variety of things that would cause this feeling. It's just too painful to be in church, to be reminded of what I have gone through. And, it's wonderful and important to celebrate our mothers and to honor mothers. At the same time, when we're gathered together as a bunch of people actually trying to ask questions about who God is and what he has for us, just as Katie sang us, saying, I long to go back to that place where there was no pain and heartache. Well, that is the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's our series, and that's as we gather here. I just want to let you know something, that while we, yes, do acknowledge our mothers, we got a little new tradition we're starting, and that's lighting a candle on Mother's Day in order to honor all of our women. Every infant daughter, every teenage young woman, every young adult, every senior adult, every woman gives birth in so many different ways to so many different people. You honor all of us because of how God has created you. And our gathering together should not be a place of pain ever, but it should be a place of hope and of healing and of knowing that you are in the right place because Jesus Christ calls you, as Megan prayed, precious. So we today not only honor our mothers, but we honor all of the women in our community. So thank you for being with us. And that said, as I was preparing, knowing it was Mother's Day, it's on the calendar, and we're in the midst of a series of trying to understand a little more deeply, even if we've been around church a long time, or especially for those of us that maybe haven't, or maybe are just recently coming back, is this word that's thrown out there a lot. You see it up there, this thing called gospel. What does it actually mean? And how seriously do we take it? We know it's a message from God. The angels announced it when Jesus was born to a bunch of shepherds. I bring you good news, same word as gospel, that causes great joy for who? For all the people. That's last week. It's a message from God. It's also intensely personal. And it is found in a person who has come. So as I'm preparing for this, I just took a little time, one of my days of study, where I started to journal and write down the names of the women, starting with my family, that had mothered me in so many different ways. Obviously, my mom and my two sisters growing up, and then meeting Dee and entering her extended family. So Dee and her mom, her sister, and then having a daughter, Katie. And then the other two young women that came in as partners with our boys, Jessica and Bianca. And then our three beautiful granddaughters, Hallie, 2.5, Issa, 2, and now Naomi, who is 3 months old. Okay, these are obvious. I wrote those down. And as I did, all of a sudden I kind of got a little, I noticed that this is not the limitations of the way women have touched me and mothered me in my life. So I started to reflect on that and started to write down a bunch of names, a whole bunch of names. One of them was somebody you don't know, Kathy Ellis, San Diego, that when I was in college, when I didn't deserve anybody to be kind to me, she was incredibly kind and empowering and welcoming. And then there's Gail Grimstead, who never had children of her own, but was on Young Life staff for decades, working at a Young Life camp called Malibu, where a bunch of us who were younger, brash guys, Gail just mothered us. And then my boss, when I first went on Young Life staff, his wife, Patty Taylor, usually, especially as guys often, and especially when you're younger, it's the guys, the men in your life, and you hear things about that. But as soon as I met Patty Taylor, I realized that Patty Taylor was really the one. Now, Don was great, but once I met Patty, the game was over. It's kind of like when you guys hired me and met Dee. Same type of thing. Right, Kyle? Yeah, and the beauty of it is I started writing down these names. I realized how little I do that. How rarely I take the time to actually consider the many, many women who have given of themselves and birthed in me new life and encouragement. And then I started writing down the names of all these peers, these friends over the years. And I would reflect on each one, and I was drawn into something, kind of an embarrassment that, why haven't I honored them? And then even the younger ones, maybe teenagers and young adults, students along the way, who gave of themselves and mothered. And I don't know if you ever done an exercise like that. I hadn't. Have you ever really thought through who has mothered you? On Mother's Day, it's more than this. Just caring for our moms and our grandmas, oh, that's wonderful. But it's recognizing that this gift of women in our midst. At the beginning, God created humanity. The Hebrew word for that is Adam. God created Adam. Male and female, he created them. And he said it was very good at the end of creation. Then humanity rebelled against God, walked away, found themselves lost and broken, and all of creation was thrown into chaos. When you see that event in Genesis 3, what you notice is the major break that occurred when humanity rebelled against God's rightful place is between men and women, is the brokenness between men and women. Ever since then, and throughout all of history, in every culture, this break can be seen. And it's usually seen where, for whatever reason, men tend to have the upper hand. And so oftentimes, in most of history, across most cultures, women have been either second class or even discarded. Even in the early church, I don't know how many of you know this, the first 150, almost 200 years of the church was almost exclusively women and slaves. People who had actually no power and no status, but they had hope in Jesus Christ. And that's what the gospel is. This good news that causes great joy for all the people is where God himself decided to enter human history and set right what was made wrong and broken at the fall, to restore God's intent at creation, exactly what Katie so beautifully sang. And that's what Jesus Christ came to do. And I got to tell you, I've been a follower of Christ for a long time. So if you're new at this thing, you're not alone trying to understand what this thing called the gospel. Because it's so easy for me to take Jesus and kind of mold him into my image. To have an understanding that he is here to bless my perspectives and my convictions. But we're diving into the gospel to see who he really is. And so this is fitting this Mother's Day to look at him and who he really is as he restores creation by how he treated women at a time in history when women were literally outcasts. And so we're going to look at a passage of scripture that we've talked about before about a year ago, John 4, and it's a long passage, so we won't read it all. I'll read parts of it. John 4, the woman at the well, it's called. If you are able, I invite you to stand for the reading of God's word as Jesus interacted with a woman that we don't even know her name. John chapter 4, starting at verse 3. And I'm just going to go through a few verses, then I'll move on and I'll explain that as we go. John 4:3. So Jesus left Judea in the south, went back once more to Galilee in the north. Now, he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from his journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan. Woman, how can you possibly ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." So they talk about this for a minute, and we go down to verse 16, and Jesus kind of changes the subject. He told her, "Go call your husband and come on back." I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, I can see you are a prophet." So they dive into this kind of theological conversation, even though Jesus had brought up her pain. We jump down to verse 25, where she finally says, "I know the Messiah called Christ is coming. When he comes, he'll explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the person speaking to you, I am he." Just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, "What do you want?" or "Why are you talking with her?" Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, Hey, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" They came out of the town and made their way toward him. Then we go down to verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. "He told me everything I ever did." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God indeed. You may be seated. I know it's hard at this point in history to have any idea what an amazingly countercultural story this is. If this was made up by the disciples to get people to believe in Christianity, this would be the last thing that they would write down. Because nobody would believe that this would have happened. Nobody would have talked to that woman at that well. And not only because she was a Samaritan, but simply because she was a woman alone coming at noon, and now we know more of her story. The women would usually get the water And it was somewhere between a quarter of a mile and a mile to this well from the town. We're not exactly sure where the town was. And so it's kind of a big deal. You would go first thing in the morning, you'd go late at night to get water to take back home. She came at noon. Now we know why she came at noon, because of her circumstances. She was alone. So as she came at noon, this woman had a history. She was an outcast. Even today, someone who had been married 5 times and living with someone, especially the good folk, if there is such a thing, would be ostracized, if not completely discarded. And that's this woman's story. And so Jesus, he breaks with culture. Good news, which will cause great joy for all the people in order to restore that which God intended at creation. Jesus came to break our understanding of how life is to be lived after the fall and the way we accommodate the fall. Jesus came to restore creation, not to somehow bless status quo. He even broke law. He broke social convention. He broke cultural norms. Jesus came to rescue that woman. Even the line in verse 4, he had to go through Samaria. A good, faithful Jew had options. They could go east or west to go north into Galilee. The Jews lived in Galilee and Judea. Samaritans, several hundred years before this, had actually created a new understanding of their historic Jewish faith. They intermarried with people who were non-Jews. They had their own temple. They literally had a different religious system. And therefore, the Jews did not have any association with them. They didn't even use utensils. So when he said, "Would you give me a drink?" she said, "You have nothing." We didn't read this, but you have nothing to draw with. You're not allowed to use my cup. You know that. But he was there to use her cup, because that's who Jesus is. I want to show you 4 things about how he interacted with her as an example of how Jesus interacts with all of us. Number 1, by initiating conversation, even though it was against the law, he honored her. He honored her. He did what certainly no man, especially a rabbi, would do. But just by initiating conversation, he connected with her that let her know she was valuable, especially at that time in history, but often since. Do we really honor? And Jesus honored her. Then, after he honored her, he said this statement that on the surface of it is horribly offensive. They have this really great conversation. They're kind of, doing good together. And then out of nowhere he goes, "Hey, go call your husband." Some speculate that that was cruel. I need to let you know that in the context of this, we see that it couldn't have been cruel, because she stayed with him and ended up becoming a very important figure in the book of John. So what we may see as cruel couldn't have been cruel, but let me tell you a deeper truth here, is that Jesus Christ was never, is never cruel. He will never intentionally harm, never. His intent is to restore, to heal, to lift up. He knew her. He not only honored her, but he demonstrated that the gospel is personal. I said last week, Zacchaeus, he called him by name. Zacchaeus. Megan 2 weeks ago gave a great sermon on our stories. He knew her story. He entered into her story, and by doing so, he welcomed her. He honored, he knows, he welcomes her. And as he welcomes her through this conversation by saying, "I am the one who has come. You are safe with me." Then the disciples show up. And clearly they're upset. She takes off immediately, leaves her water jar there. We don't know why she did. There's a lot of speculation. But what we do know is everything had changed for her. Where she had been honored. Wow. She had been known, and she was welcome. So what happened? Something happened inside of her, and she was empowered by Christ. Somehow in that interaction where she ran back to the town and said, "Come and see this man." Could he be the one we've been waiting for? Is he the answer to every dream we've ever had? Come and see. Look at how he treated this woman. These 4 things. Honored, knows, welcomes, and empowers her. That's the gospel. Now, I want to tell you something. Even his best friends, though, didn't like it. They didn't like it. Notice verse 27. It's kind of sanitized. We do that to the gospel a lot. I want to invite you to do something. Well, from now on, if you ever read the Bible, when you read the Bible, please do your best not to scrub it up, to get it to kind of fit for your own deal, or for me. I do that a lot. I'll read it in a way that, oh, yeah, I've read that, I studied that, oh, I taught on that, oh, yeah, perfect, oh, great, I get it. Instead of letting it actually hit me right between the eyes where I need to have it hit me. Look at verse 27. The disciples returned and were surprised. Oh, to find him talking with a woman. Oh, look, he's talking with a woman. That's kind of how they put it. But no one asked, what do you want? Or, why are you talking to that woman? But, you know, there's a guy named Eugene Peterson who wrote the Message version of the Bible. Here's how he puts it. Take a look at this. Just then, his disciples came back. They were shocked. Surprised is too light a word. They couldn't believe he was talking with that kind of a woman. No one said what they were thinking, but their faces showed it. That is a great translation of this, because that's what happened. These 12 guys come back with the food and go, what? What are you thinking? Disciples at the time of Jesus, when you read it carefully, you realize they are constantly trying to correct him. God is in need of our correction. Let's, make sure you write that down. Don't write that down, Andy. I was just kidding. Okay? They were disappointed. They were probably frustrated. They were astonished that Jesus would break convention and break the law to talk to that kind of a woman. But that's the gospel of Jesus Christ. Even his best friends didn't get it. And for whatever reason, ever since the fall, there's been this brokenness that Christ came to restore. Right before he's killed, a little bit before he's killed, Jesus gathered his friends, disciples together, and evidently not just the men, but the women that also followed him, and pulled them together and said, okay, I'm going to give you some new teaching, you guys. You want to know the gospel? Matthew 20, Jesus called them together and said, you guys know that the rulers of the Gentiles, that's non-Jews, lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. 4 really important words to understand Jesus Christ. If you want to know what Christianity actually is, it's following him. It's not lining up with culture. 4 important words. Not so with you. Rulers of the Gentiles, high officials, lord it over people, exercise authority, power, hierarchy, dismissal. And Jesus said, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ. On Mother's Day, for the women in our community and the girls in our community, this is so vital, because there is a God who knows, who honors, who welcomes, and who empowers you to live into the creative call he has in your life when he first knit you together in your mother's womb. You are marvelous, you are necessary, and you are a gift to all of creation, because God declares you his own daughter. No matter what culture says, no matter how anyone ever treats you, Jesus Christ in his gospel proclaims you his precious child, and he lifts you high. That woman became the first one to talk about Jesus in the whole Gospel of John. She changed an entire city and maybe thousands and millions of lives because of that day. I want to introduce you to somebody. Some of you may know, most of you don't. There's this lady that was single back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and she was a school teacher in Minnesota. And so a school teacher in Minnesota, 38 years old, she went to vacation in Hollywood. She came out here to California, went to a church called Hollywood Presbyterian Church, And they liked her, and somehow they said, hey, why don't you stay out here? The weather's a little better in Minnesota. The bar's not incredibly high. I understand that. And she goes, okay, what job did I do? It will be Christian education. That's what women get to do. Christian education. I mean, you do teaching stuff because it's not that important. Her name is Henrietta Mears. Here's a picture of her. Henrietta Mears became, by a lot of accounts, the most significant follower of Christ in the 20th century in the U.S. The most significant person to change how people saw the gospel of Jesus Christ. This woman, she was a Sunday school teacher. In fact, they just called her teacher. She and her work there took their Sunday school program for 400 people to about 6,000 in a decade or so. She actually started a company called Gospel Light, which was a major publisher, one of the first of Sunday school curriculum, by herself. She just ramrodded this through. Never married, never children, but these deep relationships. She started one of the greatest conference centers in the world called Forest Home here in Southern California. But more than that, she impacted people, because she didn't believe what she was told, both in church and in culture, of what a woman's supposed to do and who a woman is and what a woman can accomplish. So she started loving people and leading people and lifting them up. Maybe you've heard of someone, this guy named Billy something. Billy Graham, that's it. I couldn't remember his name. You ever heard of that guy? Henrietta Mears, this woman. She's the one that said, Billy, you got to be an evangelist. Get out there. A guy named Jim Rayburn started an organization called Young Life, the largest parachurch organization in the world that deals with young adults and kids. She also did Bill Bright. Maybe you've heard of Campus Crusade for Christ. She was his personal mentor at a time when women weren't allowed to be personal mentors because it didn't fit the culture. She went on to lead people like Charles E. Fuller, who was the most famous radio evangelist in the 20s and 30s and 40s before Billy Graham took off. And Charles E. Fuller started Fuller Seminary and a movement we call evangelicalism in its heyday, and Henrietta Mears was his major confidant and mentor. And then a man named J.B. Phillips, who translated the New Testament, a UK Bible scholar. I could go on and on and on. The teacher. But here's the point. She was just a public school teacher till she was 38 years old. She was just a person that met Jesus at a well and left the well of Minneapolis and ended up in the town of Hollywood and changed the world, changed millions of lives because she believed that God lifted her up and there was no boundaries to hold her back. That's the gospel. Oh, that I could somehow have the adequacy to convince you, men and women, old and young, that in Christ you are created in his image. God created Adam, humanity, Ish and Ishtar, male and female. He created them. That's who you are. One of her biographers, Marcus Brotherton, wrote a book called The Teacher, recently out. The arms, legs, hands, and feet of Christ minister to us in such varied ways. Sometimes so silent, so secret is this influence that we hardly notice at first. We may be spurred on or held in position, reached and comforted, challenged and moved forward, yet the little noticed influence is so alive that the world thunders with its reverberation even after the passage of time. That's who you are. And the church must lift up our sisters in Christ so that you are empowered to be who he is calling you to be. So I want everybody to do something for me. Don't put the slide up, Daniel, on this. I want you just to think about one non-family woman that has deeply impacted you. And you can go on if it's more than one like me, just like I did. Who's your Patty Taylor? Your Gail Grimston? See their face. Look at their smile. Oh Lord, if they're living, hold them, heal them, lift them up for your sake. And if they are not, tell them thank you for us. Amen. So we're going to do something really weird. Sorry, you guys, it's going to be just outside the box for some of you, but it's okay. We're St. Andrews. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I thought it was funny. Our beloved Katie is going to sing a beautiful song. And the lyrics I hear as both an acknowledgement and prayer and gratitude, but also a commission. It's called Homeward Bound by Kristen DeMarco. I will run this race, and I will do it all for love. Your love compels me forward. Your love controls my heart, and I cannot get away. So I will fight this good fight of faith, and I will do it all for love. You are my great reward. You're so worth fighting for, and I can't wait to see your face. We're going to do two things for the women in our congregation. Fellas, this is for the guys. When I tell you, not yet, we're going to stand in honor of our sisters here, young and old. We're going to stand as Katie sings this beautiful song, and we're going to honor them by our standing. If it's appropriate and you want to take a hand or a touch, as long as it's appropriate and it fits the intent of this. But otherwise, just guys stand, and this will also not only be our honoring, but it's our prayer to strengthen the women in our community because they deserve God's blessing on